How's it going? I'm making a PowerPoint presentation to help a friend who wants to get into the game, and I figured why not? I'll make it a YouTube video. Um, this is about understanding the Elder Scrolls Legends card game, and it's going to be a basic introduction to basically card games in general and just elements of the game. So just to start out, cards have a certain anatomy, different parts you need to know. So there's the cost of the card, which is the amount of mana you need to cast it. This is a creature, so it has an attack and a defense, and it has a specific creature type. So instead of saying creature there, it's going to say dark elf or goblin or Khajiit or some other name of this type. It typically doesn't come into play very much. And finally, in the lower end of the card, you have the effect. It could have multiple effects, like this one, when it's summoned, gets a 2/2 guard that's added to your hand. And it also has a keyword called rally. So some cards have no effects, some cards have multiple effects, and we'll get into those more later. In terms of evaluating a card, specifically a creature, typically a vanilla creature should have about 2 times its cost plus one in its overall stats. So for 3 costs, that would be 7, which would be distributed as like a 3/4 or a 4/3, a 5/2, a 2/5, that kind of spread. If it is understated like this creature is, it needs to have a really good effect that is worth the offset in immediate stats. And this is like an okay example. It draws a card, and it has a keyword, so it's not a terrible card, but that's sort of how you would want to evaluate creatures in general. The other types of cards that are in the game include items. Uh, these have a plus X slash plus X value, which is given to a creature. So these are attached to a creature, and then they get buffed by their whatever their effect is, and they may have additional effects like this one draws a card when it's used. The other type of cards we have include actions, which are called spells in other games, or maybe sorceries. They're a one-time use effect, and then you lose the card. So usually you want these cards to either draw a card or kill something so that you're trading it one for one in card advantage. And the last type of card we have in this game is a support. Supports are like enchantments in other games or static effects. They sit on the field either indefinitely or until they're used up. In this case, this one has 3 uses. So once per turn, you can use it one time. And after 3 uses, this goes away. There's also supports that just do something continuously in the background until they're removed by a card effect. That's the final type of card in the game. I want to go over combat in this game, which is very similar to other online games, but very different from physical card games. So here we have a 2 mana 3/2 Broom of Profiteer versus a 2 mana 2/2 Claverian Trooper. What will happen is the attack of the Trooper, which is your card is on the bottom. Your card will hit their defense, and then their attack will hit your defense. And so in this example, the Bruma would go to 3/0, and the Trooper would go to 2 -1. If a creature gets to 0 health, it dies, and if it goes negative, it also dies. So these would both kill each other in combat. Here's another example just to show when a creature survives. We have our Cliff Racer hitting its 4 to Bruma's 2, and Bruma hitting his 3 to Cliff Racer's 4 defense. So that would result in the Bruma dying, going -2, and the Cliff Racer remaining at 1. And this is a unique thing with online card games where it will remain at 1 forever. It doesn't go away at the end of the turn. It remembers the previous damage that it's taken. There are 5 primary types of effects. These are unofficial terms that I'm about to give out, but this is the best way to think of them. You have keyword effects, which are just normal effects, but they're condensed down to one word so that the card text isn't too heavy. I'll go over keywords in a moment. We have trigger effects, which is an effect that has some activation condition. For example, this one says whenever you destroy a rune, then you gain 3 health. So that only activates under its condition. You have creatures that have effects called last gasp, or when they die, they get some sort of effect. We have summon abilities, so as soon as you put it down and cast it, then you get the summon effect. And some cards have static effects, and here's another support that has no uses. It just stays forever. And all it does is it passively increases the attack and defense of all your creatures by one. So those are the 5 different types of effects in the game. And I want to go into the keywords a little bit more so that you know everything that the typical effects would look like. We have lethal. If a lethal creature does even a single point of damage to another creature, even if it wasn't enough to bring it to 0 or negative health, it will die. Charge, it means that it can attack the same turn that it is summoned. All creatures who do not have charge have summoning sickness, which means you have to pass your turn before they're eligible to attack. Drain allows you to gain health when it deals damage, but only during your turn. So if my initiate attacks something, I will gain 3, but if something attacks my initiate, golden initiate, I will not gain 3. And breakthrough is similar. It only activates on your turn, and whenever you would kill something and drop its health below 0, it now the opponent will take that much damage from 0 to the negative. So if this were to hit the golden initiate, it would take her down to -2, and then the opponent would take the -2 rather than just the initiate receiving the damage like normal. We also have guard, which is a mandatory creature to attack whenever it's on the field. Typically, if there was no guard on the field and there were creatures on the field, you get to pick if you are going to attack a creature or the face. The turn player gets to decide how to attack the creatures. It's very similar to Hearthstone if you're familiar with that game. Guard makes it so that that creature must be attacked first before the player has freedom to make their own choices for what to attack. Rally is an effect that when that creature declares an attack, it gives a random creature in your hand +1 attack and +1 defense. Prophecy is a unique mechanic in this game. Whenever a rune is destroyed, the player whose rune was destroyed draws a card. If you draw a card that says Prophecy on that card draw, you can cast the card for free immediately. If you don't want to cast it, you can still put it in your hand to save it for later. Regenerate is an ability where after a creature has taken damage, if at the beginning of your next turn it's still on the field, it will heal itself back up to its natural full health. And finally, Ward is an ability that makes it so that the first time that creature will take any damage, it is going to destroy the ward that it has instead. So whether it takes 1 damage or 30 damage, the ward will absorb all of it. I'm going to move on to a few other advanced topics. That was really all you needed to know to have a pretty good grasp of the different types of cards and things in the games. If you're a newer player to card games, don't really get too concerned with this part. You should watch it so you're exposed to the ideas. But this is something that you will learn as you play card games in general. These are pretty universal patterns in card games. Card advantage is very important in card games in general. You're constantly trying to maximize your card advantage, the number of cards you have in your hand and field, and you're trying to minimize the number that your opponent has. Most games can be won if you can just make it so that they run out of cards and you still have cards, because now they can't really deal with everything you have left to fire at them. There are different ways to get card advantage. For example, Cunning Ally says, summon, put a firebolt in your hand. That's a firebolt. It's a 1 mana spell. Only if the top part of your deck is blue. So that's a conditional one, but let's just pretend like it always works. You could think of Cunning Ally as saying draw 1 card, but that card will specifically be Firebolt. Tome of Alteration here says draw a card, so it replaces itself, which is good for maintaining advantage. And then you have cards like Triumphant Jarl that say, under some condition, draw 2 cards. Those cards can be really strong for making your card advantage start to snowball on your opponent. And then you have other kinds of cards like Alfie Conjurer who will summon another card. So it's effectively like saying draw this 4 mana 5/3 and play it simultaneously. So that's more of a tempo card, which we'll touch lightly on later, but it's still card advantage. You're still going +1 in card economy when you're playing those cards, and that's a really important part of card games is managing and maintaining your card economy. There are four kinds of decks, typically. I mean, there's more than that, but four primary ones. You have control decks, which are characterized by having really late game heavy ended decks that have like a whole bunch of 8 drop or 10 drop cards. They're just, I'll get into the details of them in a minute. Aggro will try to use really low cost cards to just spit out a whole bunch of aggressive guys to try to kill you as quickly as possible. Mid range is kind of a mix between them. They want to have quite a bit of early game, but they still want to have some late game. And then combo, we're not going to really cover, but it is a category. It's outside the scope of this introductory presentation. So more on what the decks are trying to do. Control decks are just wanting to stall, destroy the board with spells, usually. They want to get 2 for 1 with their spells. So there's spells that say do this to all minions, like damage to all minions, for example. If they can get, to kill 2 or 3 minions with that, then they're going to start winning the card advantage game, and then that's how control decks ultimately win. So they want to stall it out so they can have the time to play all their big high cost cards that do crazy stuff. Aggro decks are kind of the opposite. They're playing a whole bunch of low cost cards with no high cost cards, and they're just trying to get damage to you as quickly as possible before they run out of gas. Mid range decks are different than both because they will play differently depending on the opponent. If you're a mid range deck player, if your opponent is an aggro deck, you're going to want to play like a control deck. And if they're a control deck, you want to play like an aggro deck. So you want to play the opposite sort of game plan as your opponent when you're playing mid range. Combo decks, again, are outside the scope of this presentation, and they're kind of rare in this game specifically. Here are some graphs of the card distribution within some decks, just to give you an idea. As you can see in the first one, the control deck has a very wavy curve toward the back end because they're running so many high cost cards. Aggro has a very sharp spike at the beginning and then it tails off very quickly. And mid range has a smooth curve that has a good mix of both early game and late game to try to have the best of both worlds. These deck types or styles have a slight advantage. If you're playing control, you have a little bit of an advantage against aggro because aggro will run out of gas and control typically runs more board wipes, which are cards that will hit the whole field for damage to get rid of stuff. And aggro just won't have enough gas to push through when everything's dying so frequently. Aggro has an advantage against mid range because mid range is very dependent on tempo, and a lot of times aggros can get the jump on them, and they don't have enough time to develop enough tempo to offset the amount of aggression coming out. And finally, mid range is good against control because it has enough late game tempo cards that it can overwhelm the control's ability to board wipe it. Like the creatures might be too big for the board wipes to actually wipe out their whole field, things like that. Um, so it's not like rock, paper, scissors in terms of if you play one, you're just going to win. But it does give you like a 3%, 4% edge overall, a small edge. One of the important things to do when playing is to make a plan. What are you going to do? Well, I can tell you previously, I already told you what the plan is for them. This is what they want to do. But you got to make a more specific plan. What am I going to do right now, given the cards I have and what my opponent is doing? Important things to do here is evaluating what creatures you could trade into your opponent's creatures to maintain the most number of creatures. Maybe you have 2 creatures that can kill two of their creatures but not die, and then you got to trade in your remaining 2 so that the remaining field doesn't trade back into your weakened ones. Things like that. You want to look at what cards are in your hand that can immediately impact the field. Those are oftentimes going to be actions or charge. Even guard could be considered impacting the field since it prevents them from attacking things that are there. You want to see what are obvious things you have to do. Like, well, that's I have to kill this, and you have a card that can kill it. Well, then you know you got to spend however much mana that is to 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 kill to kill that threat, and then you'll have some remaining mana that you can decide. Okay, what's the best use of this remaining source that I have that is sort of up to me, and not something that has to be done. Um, One important aspect of card games is anytime you're going to play a card that draws a card from your deck, you want to do that first if you know that you're going to play it. So, for example, if you have a 2 mana creature that says summon draw a card, and you know you're going to have 2 mana at the end of the play you're doing, and you plan on playing it, you should play it first because you might draw a new card that can be played still that makes it a better outcome for the current situation. You don't want to draw last and go, oh, if I had just drawn first, I would have done a better play. Um, in this game, there's runes every 5 health that you attack your opponent. And when you break runes, they're going to draw cards and they're going to possibly hit prophecy. So anytime you're going to attack them, you want to attack them with the cards that are already established on the field first. Because let's say they hit a card that I'll show you later called Piercing Javelin. And Piercing Javelin says prophecy, destroy a creature. Well, you don't want to put down like a 6 cost creature for it to get javelined when you could have attacked first, and then their javelin has to hit a 3 cost creature that's on the field, and then you get to put down the 6 cost creature without having to worry about it being removed for free. There's also a sort of fog of war approach here, which is even if it wasn't a 6 cost versus 3 cost card, the less information that they know about what you're doing at the end of your turn, when they have to make decisions earlier in the turn, will make them make suboptimal choices. If they have all the information, they can more easily find the most optimal way to use their resources. So you want to hold that information back until the end of the turn and do it last. The last thing you have to know is color specific outs that your opponent could have. Again, I'm going to go over a few of these, but it's by no means an exhaustive list. But there's cards like Ice Storm or Piercing Javelin or Shadowfen Priest. Depending on their colors, you might need to know that that might be coming, and maybe that will affect your plan as far as the order that you decide to play the cards. We'll touch on that a little bit more toward the end. Another important aspect that I'm not going to go into too much detail with is the concept of tempo in the card game. It's very hard to define, but you know when you have it. The way you get tempo is by being mana efficient. You want to always put, if you have 4 mana, instead of playing 1 3 cost, it's better to play a 4 cost or to play 2 2 cost creatures so that you're using up as much of your resources that you get per turn to put the most pressure or resources out to the field. That's usually best, but there are exceptions, and that would go back to the planning section if you're in one of those exceptions. You want to maintain board presence by taking trades where you get to maintain creatures that are injured rather than allowing your opponent to make full trades and wipe out your tempo. And you want to switch all your pressure to a new lane whenever you decide that you're just going to become an aggressive plan. So in Legends, there are 2 different sides of the fields that cannot interact with each other through battle. If you're controlling the left side and they completely lock you up on that side, then you want to just throw all your momentum to the right side, so that the lack of tempo in the left side is offset by your gained tempo in the right side. And those are just a few examples of how tempo can come into your planning more or less. I'm going to do a small deeper dive into some color specific information, and this will be the last section of this little introductory presentation here. Each color has sort of themes or things that they tend to do. They almost every color can do almost anything. You can't just see a color and know what kind of deck they're on, but you know what people tend to do with those decks. I'm not going to read all this out here, but this is what these decks tend to like to do. So you might want to read it, maybe read some of the cards that are available in each of the colors and kind of get an idea of um, the plans that each of these colors would do. And also think to yourself, if you start mixing colors, because remember in this game you can either have two, or you can have one, two, or three, but you almost never play one. You can have two or three colors, which means you can start mixing the plans between these descriptions together, and that makes interesting combinations. Some specific cards that I'll just highlight is that for white, they like to blow things up, full stop. So they have cheap spells like Execute that can just straight up kill a creature as long as it has 2 power or less. They have Piercing Javelin, which is a 5 cost spell that kills anything, and it has Prophecy. They have board wipes like Immolating Blast, which will take all the creatures on the field and reduce it so that there's only one in each lane. And they have complete side wipe board wipes, where it kills all the creatures on one side. Red is known for ping, and ping is an unofficial term for cheap ways to do 1 damage, which can kill things that would otherwise live through battle. Just like in the Cliff Racer example at the beginning, it had 1 health left. So if there was a ping thrown in either before or after the battle, that would die now for almost no cost. So red is really known for pinging. This is another ping card, but also more importantly, it's silence. So this can remove all keywords and effects from your card, which is a really strong effect. Red also has its own form of board wipe via Cradle Crush Giant. It can deal 2 damage to an entire side of the board, which in certain game scenarios is extremely strong. And it has really strong tempo cards too. So this is a card that when it's summoned, you get to unsummon a creature that's on the field, and that loss of tempo can really make red uh, win the game a lot of the time. Tempo is very important, especially for aggro and mid-range decks. And so red is often blended in for its ping, which helps tempo, and for its tempo cards like this that unsummon creatures. Blue is known for ward. There are some non-blue ward cards, but almost all the ward is in blue. And ward makes things hard to kill because the first time you hit it, it doesn't really get damaged. And it has cards like Wardcrafter, which will give any creature on the field ward at a given notice. So you have to always be mindful of the fact that things that you think will trade with each other might not be trading when blue is in their colors. It also has removal like white, but instead of absolute removal, it does damage removal. So this will do kill anything with 4 defense or less. Ice Storm will wipe the entire board of 3 defense or less. And Fingers of the Mountain can deal 1, 2, and 3 for a total of 6 damage across the board in any order that they want. Blue isn't absolute board wiping, but it's similar to white, and it has a little bit more utility because, for example, this can also hit the player to kill them, whereas white doesn't have cards like that, would be called reach. You can reach past the board and still do damage to the player. Purple, I don't really have a lot of examples, but purple is really known for having just really good statted creatures. So if you remember in the example, a 3 cost card should have about 7 worth of stats. And here's a 3 cost 4/4, which is, it doesn't really have a crazy effect, but it's just a lot of stats for the amount of mana that you're paying. So purple is really good at what would be like tempo mid-rangey creatures. Um, and they're also known for support and silence effects like Shadowpen Priest. The last one I'll touch on is green, which is the only color that can reliably move creatures between the 2 sides of the board with a card like Shadow Shift. And they're also really known for charge minions. So green is very aggressive oriented, but again, any color can be used for different utilities, not just their typical use. And that's really it as far as this introductory sort of presentation for the game. Nothing will ever substitute just getting out there and playing the game and getting a good handle hands on with the kinds of cards and decks that people use. But this is an introduction to things you should be working on as a player if you're wanting to get better. So thanks for stopping by and take care.